Good morning. This is Trang Vo at the California ISO. Thank you for joining us for the Release User Group on February 18, 2025. I hope everyone had a nice long weekend. Today's call and webinar will be recorded and published on the website for a limited time, and the presentation will be made available after the call and by tomorrow. So I'll go ahead and get started. We'll start with the release plan summary. For independent 2025 releases, we're still tracking the FERC Order 2023 generator interconnection lifecycle releases throughout the year. Our next one will be release 2.2 in March. For highest emergency rating, we are working through that implementation to start the market simulation and production activation in March as well. We have CPM enhancements, track 1, planned for April 1st, and then hybrid resources phase 2C for REMS later on in April. And then the congestion revenue right system upgrade planned for the end of April. Into the summer timeframe, we have FERC 881, track 2, planned for availability in July. And then the WEAM fab enhancements that the schedule is still forthcoming for, but which is still targeted for 2025. On to our fall 2025 release, we have subscriber PTO model for October 1st, and then the transmission exchange agreement by October 1st as well. And then forward into spring 2026 release, we have day-ahead market enhancements, extended day-ahead market, and then the EDAM ISO BA participation rules, as well as EDAM onboarding of PAC in May of 2026, and then PGE in October of 2026. We have our WEAM onboarding of 2 of our oncoming entities in May. And then for future releases, we have placeholders for enabling NGRs for participation in intra-SC trades, and then the BCR to storage resources, or the unwarranted BCR. And then we have the transmission service and market scheduling priorities, track 4, and then a placeholder for the settlement upgrade project. Our next quarterly update will be by April for settlement upgrade. Right? So I'll go ahead and move on to some reminders about BRS comment periods that are available. So we have the EDAM ISO BA participation rules BRS 1.4. That comment period is open through the end of this week, the 21st. And when we published this, it was available prior to the last release user group. So just as a reminder that BRS has been out there, and we added the calculation examples and updated the cross-references to EDAM, so should have been able to take a look at that prior to this, and then we will be going over the BRS revisions in the beginning of this rug. And then for upcoming BRSs, we have the EDAM implementation BRS version 1.4 that's planned to publish this week as well, and that will have an associated comment period open for that too. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on. We're going to go a little bit out of order today so that I could front load the EDAM ISO BAA BRS discussion. All right, and so we have this project-specific slides here, and so this is the overview of the EDAM ISO BA participation rules initiative, and there are no changes to this overview slide, and then we have the milestones here. So just a quick look at the milestones too of what is coming up. So we did file with FERC in November for some additional changes, and so we're still pending a response there. And then for the BRSs, we published 1.4, and then for settlement config guides, we did post revisions on January 30th, and then the first config output file with updated tech doc posting and charge code matrix for settlements is planned for April 29 ahead of that market simulation. And then the other update I wanted to draw your attention to is for the market simulation scenarios. So we did revise the market simulation plan for spring 2026 for EDAM, DAME, and then the EDAM ISOBA participation rules projects to include this initiative. And then the project-specific scenarios are being developed for this project for the ISOBA participation rules, and that is planned end of March, but I put April here to give us a little bit of buffer just in case of the unforeseen issues. And then we have the market simulation that aligns with the DAME and EDAM market simulation, and then the production activation aligns with that spring 2026 release with DAME and EDAM as well, right? So the next few slides will be presented by Michael Schultz, and he's on, and then he will also share some additional material. So Mike, it is all yours.
Thanks, Trey. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Schultz. I'm the business analyst for EDAM ISO-BAA participation rules. This is the ISO-BAA's participation in the greater EDAM framework initiative. And we'll participate by the framework's rules, but we do have our own specific tariff requirements, which in particular involves the distribution of EDAM access charges revenue and their distribution to the PTOs, which is the basis of what I wanted to talk about today. In the latest external BRS, we added an Appendix A, which kind of goes through the calculation of an example of how this distribution is performed. And if we could, I'll just go ahead and let's see if I can share and make sure that Stringer, are you able to see my?
Yes.
Wonderful. And so what we'll do is go through just the different components of the revenue requirements, and then talk about how they're all aggregated into the basic requirement. There's a lot I went over last time, so I imagine there might be some questions at each component presentation, or as I present each component. I'll take a pause, we can talk about it, and at the end, if there's more additional questions, we can talk about it as well. Additionally, there is the comments page on the policy page to provide additional questions or comments, and those are welcome. So I'll go ahead and get started. Let me go ahead and open up. So the EDAM access charges are a way of us recovering that capacity which converts to the EDAM market on our intertie locations. There are three components. The first being component one is historical, which is the typical, what we see is over a 3-year average, historical average of what the revenue we would expect at each location. That portion of it, which we would expect, would be foregone or recoverable. Component two would be the new transmission, which would compensate for additional transmission or upgrades. We'll refer to these as upgrades in the in our transmission systems. It also covers some additional expiration of contracts. Component three, the excess wheel-through transfers, is basically just that amount of wheel-through transfer that exceeds the net total, the total net transfers. And we'll go into that as well. There's a fourth component, I would say, and that is the true-up. We'll talk about how the true-up works. And with that, let's get started. So for the historical component one revenue requirement, at each location at the intertie, we would determine sorry about that. We will determine what that three-year historical average WAC revenue amount would be. Of that three-year average WAC revenue amount, we would determine the portion of that which would be recoverable. That would be accomplished by applying a multiplier of the ratio of the exports that would specifically sink into EDAM BAAs during that historical period relative to the total exports. We would exclude any ETC TORs in this calculation, and the end result would be a component one recoverable revenue ratio, location specific. So in this example, we have a 2-location BAA, just to simply be a little bit simplified. Our 3-year historical average WAC revenue would be 11.1 million. We determine what those exports are during that period, and these numbers aren't to be reflective of real numbers. They're just for illustration.
So Mike,
yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to be sure that you're meaning to present to us the slides that you have right now and not the BRS itself, right?
That is correct.
Okay, good.
We can't
Thank you.
go, yeah. Are you able to see the Excel
No.
sheet? No, okay. Let me try this again.
That's much better. I can see the Excel now.
Thank you. Apologies for that. So we're going through the historical period. We are looking at the first location. We've determined the 3-year historical average WAC revenue at that location. We've determined the ratio, which is the exports that sink within the EDAM BAA areas or the EDAM area footprint, and then as relative to the total exports. This gives us the ratio, which we then apply to what is the historical average WAC revenue. With that, we would distribute, we list the entitlements for each PTO at that location. And the total at the location, the recoverable amount based on the average WAC revenue times the multiplier, the component one multiplier ratio. And that gets distributed on the basis of each PTO's entitlements relative to the entirety of all the entitlements at that location. So we define the distribution on that basis. There was a discussion about a reduction. I will come back to this. For the second location, we would follow the same process. The ISO, so the ISO BAA component will be the aggregate of those 2 location amounts. That would be the total component one revenue, recoverable revenue requirement at the ISO BAA level. We would then determine on the basis of that if one of the things we have to now determine is whether or not we have, excuse me, a cap limit for our recoverable amount. We shouldn't exceed what the ISO BAA has as its total. So to do so, we aggregate all from the ISO area, the sinks, from that, the exports that sync with the EDAM BAAs, and relative to the all the exports. Of course, we exclude ETC2R. We come up for the ISO BAA level ratio, and we apply that to the total amount of between the sum of all the different locations, and we come to a revenue limit amount of 4.321 million. If we calculate the sum of all the different individual locations, revenues, recoverable revenues, we found that we did in fact exceed that limit by about 24,000. And so the reduction is based on each PTO's component one revenue total relative to the entire. And so the reduction at each location is provided just for granularity to see how the math works, but from that basis, we would then reduce to meet that, to be within that cap limit. This only applies if we did exceed. If we hadn't, there would be no. If we were under, we would use that amount. That's how the component one works. So we'll take a pause for questions.
Okay, I see Chen Yu's hand raised. Please unmute your line and go ahead.
Hi, Mike. Thank you so much. This is Chen Yu from PG&E. Thank you so much for walking through these examples. Do you think we can actually get a copy of this and actually take a little more time to digest?
Sure. We can provide the spreadsheet as a BRS aid to kind of see exactly how. We do try to provide like the calculations, and so you can see, but I imagine it would be more helpful to actually have the model. In addition, I'll see if I can do this. I'll provide, we'll have available a guide that kind of shows each of the BRQs and as they associate to each of the components. So you can kind of maybe use the spreadsheet and the PowerPoint as an aid to kind of see how each works and kind of where, if you need more information, which BRQ would possibly provide that. And hopefully that would give you questions. And then if you did have any further questions, for sure you would want to go ahead and submit comments or questions, and we could respond to those.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? I did go through a lot, so I do appreciate that there would be some review.
No other questions?
Okay. Well, I will go back then. Okay, so that was the first component, which was historical. Separate from the historical, we would have new transmission, which is the component 2 of the revenue recoverable revenue requirement. And with that, we would provide 2 different options from this model. One is what happens when existing contracts that expire after EDAM day one release their transmission back to the market, and what portion of those revenues would be recoverable. The second, I would say, use case, or the second option of this is actual facility upgrades, which we'll call upgrades to the transmission system. It's possible that each of those could be done on the same location, or a new location could be created, and we'll treat both instances. In the first instance, we're using the same two-location BAA. And in location one, one of the things we would define is we look at what are the transmission revenue requirements. For PTOs, this is going to be something that they will know on the basis of their project work and the contracts. The revenue that ISO would not have access to these, and so these would be part of what you would attest using your attestation, and prior to that, filing with FERC to ensure approval, FERC approval of what's submitted as a prerequisite to attesting. So these are the transmission revenue requirements for all locations that each PTO would have, and we would just note that on the side as that will be used in the model. We also note that each PTO will have its historical or component one recoverable revenue used as a basis for calculating how its new transmission gets recovered, the revenue from its new transmission gets recovered. And so this part, we'll do that. We'll go into it once we get into the calculations, but this is just for a reference that this is the same amounts that we used in the component one calculation. Also, we do the proxy baseline ratio. This proxy baseline ratio is used instead of a component one recoverable revenue ratio for those locations that did not exist prior to EDAM. So this is only when you have a new location and it did not exist prior to EDAM that this would be applied. We calculate it using the ISO BAA level historical WAC revenue 3-year average, and then we apply that relative to the 3-year average transmission revenue requirements for the entire ISO BAA, and that would get a percentage that we would apply here. In location one, contracts expire, we note that here is the amount for each PTO of the recoverable component one revenue. But then we list also the revenue of the contract that is expiring for that year it expired. See if we can. Okay. And so to find the locations, the amount of revenue that was released for the transmission being released by this expired contract, we would apply the revenue amount of that contract to the ratio or the percentage of the component one recoverable revenue. We would adjust if a cap limit was enforced, which in our example it was, and that would be that amount relative to the transmission revenue requirement for that PTO. And that we took up here. We would do the same exercise for location 2, which has another expired, expired contracts for those PTOs associated with that location. And this is just to show that it would be an aggregate of multiple locations that this would come. Having a new export location where a new system upgrade was, and we would have projects, that upgrade transmission revenue requirement defined the amount. We would note then that its recoverable revenue would be the ratio applied, the proxy baseline ratio applied to that revenue amount. So we have 27 million for PTO2 being required as part of its transmission revenue requirement. We apply the proxy baseline because this did not exist, this location did not exist prior to EDAM, and we get 12.7. Okay, the aggregate of all these expired contracts, all the different the new upgrades would be aggregated at the ISO. For each PTO, it would be just its sum of each its individual recoverable amounts, and then that gets aggregated up to the ISO. Any questions on new transmission calculation for recoverable revenue requirements?
Steve Balda has a hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes. Good morning, Trang. Good morning, Michael. I'm just wondering, is there any part of all these calculations that the CAISO would be able to help facilitate for its market participants? Perhaps something similar like the inter-SC trade, where the CAISO would be able to help kind of facilitate all the calculations and all the invoices or the settlements for all these.
Although that's a really good question. So I would say that we do provide advisory where it's possible. For example, for the component 1, an advisory would be provided. We'll get into the excess wheel through, and those will be provided as a in your billing, in your monthly bill determinant file. Which would then apply for the following year. So those would be collected, aggregated, and then applied for the following year. So those would be provided. Where I think we would have, and we can definitely support the calculation process. What I think is we don't have access to the revenues that are, associated with these contracts that are expiring, and also the upgrades. We wouldn't necessarily have that access to that information. And so we would, I think the understanding would be, reach out to your client reps if you have questions. But we'll go into the troop amounts and the excess wheel through, and those will be provided in your settlement statements on a monthly basis that you would be then apply for the year following. So did I answer the question, or were there any follow-up questions to that?
No follow-up, and thank you so much for the explanations, Mike. Appreciate
Great.
it. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll go into what comes next, but and how we ISO would provide that information. But I do think that there is an issue where we just wouldn't have some of the revenue data on hand to be able to supply a calculation. Any other questions?
they're all clear to move forward.
Okay, we have then the excess wheel through component 3. This is the third component of the recoverable revenue requirement. And it is, in fact, what is provided by the ISO. It would be provided in the monthly bill determinant file on a monthly basis, which then would aggregate and become the next year's projected excess wheel through component for recoverable revenue requirements for each PTO. The excess wheel through is the amount of wheel through transfers that exceed the total net transfers, and either in the import or export directions. And what we can show is just how the calculation is done. Each hour is calculated. We don't net over hours, nor do we would net over days the value. So each excess is on an hourly basis. In this example, we show. Oh, and the other thing we'd say is these calculations then are bound by 0. So in case you are below what is the amount of wheel through volume, that would then apply to, it would not be a negative value. So this is only a matter in the direction of excess, not into shortfall. First step would be to determine the excess volume, and it is the minimum between what is export in the export direction or import direction of the transfer. Then comes the excess part, which bound by 0 would be that amount of the volume that is exceeded by the wheel through transfer quantity. And so the equation is provided there. For each hour of the day, we aggregate those excess amounts, and then for that across the month, we would apply and associate to each of the PTOs. The PTOs receive their distribution. The amount of the amount of the wheel through excess wheel through volume is multiplied then by the current WAC rate. All this is provided on the ISO website, and will be, and that amount then gets distributed to each PTO on the basis of its own transmission revenue requirement relative to the revenue requirement for the entire ISO BAA. Any questions on excess wheel through?
I don't see any hands raised or comments here, Mike. Thank you.
Okay. Well, then going through to the final, and that is the true up. The true up is what adjusts to any amount that of revenue that was not recovered, or in excess that was recovered. It trues up for the following year. So in this example, we see the components, the 3 components, and then what is the total amount for the ISO. And in this case, we had a shortfall, so of about 8.2 million. And so that amount gets projected to the next year as its true up component, and it gets recovered as a credit. Likely, similarly, the same would happen if, in fact, an excess was recovered. Then we would have to compensate as part of a debit into the next year. Excuse me. This shows how the distributions were working for this example for each PTO and how then it aggregates up. This table also shows that the component 1 and component 2 are fixed across the years. You'll see they're the same as you go across. And the only thing that would change them would be a change to the actual, either the EDAM area footprint or the some of the new transmission work that would be provided or expired contracts for component 2. Are there any questions with regards to how true-ups work? Kind of a high-level overview.
No hands or comments here from my side. All right.
With that, I thank you. We'll provide the Excel spreadsheet and the guide here, shown here, to kind of help guide through and go through the calculations. Again, if there's any questions, please do use the comments. If there are any other questions about the BRS itself, I can answer those.
All right. Thank you, Mike. I don't see any other hands or comments. So that was very helpful. We look forward to getting the Excel file out there as a BRS aid, and then also the recording will be published to refer back to as well.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, thanks, Mike. Okay, and again, the comment period for BRS 1.4, that includes these examples, that comment period is open. So any additional feedback that you have, please submit via the commenting tool. And then we will include the latest into the market simulation scenarios for this project as well. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left. I'm going to go a little quickly through the rest of the presentation, highlighting some key focus areas for each of the projects coming up. Okay, so let me go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so Mike went through, so we had a few slides for the BRS revisions here that he went through. And so and I also want to call your attention to the market simulation scenarios that are referenced in the BRS as well. So those revisions are in 1.4. Okay, so we'll go on to our independent projects. For FERC 2023, the generator interconnection lifecycle, as I mentioned, there's a release 2.2 that's targeted mid-March. And we will communicate more as we get closer to that, and any communications as appropriate for any impacts to you. Okay, and please, as I go through, just raise your hand for any questions, or just put something in the chat, and then I will address those throughout the presentation. Okay, for highest emergency rating, no scope changes here. We have OMS available in the map stage environment, and it's also in production inactive. And for the integrated market simulation, we're targeting the market sim to start next week and go for 2 weeks and yield a production activation of March 20th. So those that are looking for engaging in the integrated market simulation, you may need some assistance for us to be able to provide that evidence of that data flowing through from OMS into the market, as we have some environment system limitations in map stage. Please coordinate and communicate with the market sim team, and we will be able to help you with that validation, that integrated validation of HER. All right. So I'll go on to CPM Enhancements Track 1. So this is a slide that was not in the last RUG, so it is new to this RUG. And you can see the reference to Track 1 and Track 2 and the high-level business problem or need. And then specific to Track 1, we have 5 different proposals being addressed as part of CPM Enhancements Track 1 implementation. And you'll see that proposal 4.1 and then 4.5 require system changes. And then the rest are BPM changes, existing functionality, and business processes. So we do have some PRRs that will be forthcoming for reliability requirements and then settlements and billing. And then for impacted systems with this Track 1 implementation, we'll have changes to Sierra. For OASIS, we'll leverage existing functionality. And then for Kaiso.com, there is a business process modification. We do have a version of the BRS that is available internally that we're working on publishing for your review. That includes the information that I highlighted above and the detailed business requirements. And then there are no tech specs. We do not have a market simulation planned for this. We will continue to promote the changes through our environment. So MapStage will get the changes, but the nature of this implementation is for contact information, and so that's something that customers can review themselves in MapStage and or production, so we don't expect a full market simulation for this. And for production activation, we plan that for April 1st. All right. So I will, once we publish the BRS for this, we'll open a comment period as well and send out an announcement. Okay, so I'll move on to the next project. We have hybrid resources to CRIM. So we do have some new information in this presentation for you. So first, we'll stop at the milestones, and we have the shapefile information that is going to be presented actually starting today, and will carry on in the TUG and market simulation forums as well. So I'll go to that in just a moment. Our market simulation is planned for March 13th through the 19th, and then the production activation is planned for April 9th. So I have 2 slides about this implementation following. So we have this overview here for the implementation, and it outlines and distinguishes between the current process for the Excel site sheet and then the new process to leverage the shapefile submissions. So at this time, the action that we would like you to take is to determine the appropriate shapefile software compatible with your organization. And then once that software is determined, then you can leverage our CSV templates for the requirements of solar wind projects and practice creating those shapefiles even ahead of market simulation. So you can start generating those files now, and then in the market simulation, we will have those in the system in MapStage and RIMS and validate those. So below, you'll see the 2 different types of templates. And then on the next slide, we have other resources for you. So we have a readiness note here that will give you more information about this implementation. And then also on the release planning page, we have the templates already. And then just a recap of market simulation, and then the training will be March 5 ahead of that simulation. All right, and Dottie did put a link to the release planning page where you can find those templates. And then we look forward to engaging with customers on this, and then for the training coming up in a few weeks, and then the market sim. Okay, thanks, Dottie. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to CRR. So I'll go to the milestones here. So the next CPG is February 27 at 9. And our big focus right now is market simulation. So I do have an update here. And Martin from the market simulation side has been communicating as we meet milestones for the market simulation. So you know that the UI is available in MapStage. The first API was we enabled the second set of APIs in the MapStage environment. and that was on the 12th with an associated communication from Martin. And then we have the market simulation for week 1 is officially kicking off today. So we have windows open as of this morning to start the first day of market simulation, and Martin did send out the calendar for reference for those that are registered to participate. So please take note that if you are participating in that market simulation, the windows opened earlier today, and we do have windows closing as early as noon for the first window, and then 5 p.m. for additional windows that are closing, and then you can continue to see all the other submission windows, and they're open and closing throughout this first week. All right. And then Brenda, thank you so much. She linked to the notice for the CPG, which has, again, just a one-off start time of 9 a.m. on the 27th as well. All right, thanks, Brenda. Okay, our production, so you can stay tuned to additional announcements for the subsequent weeks of market simulation, and also we have our regular market simulation calls for any market simulation activity, and then we also are kicking off the CRR specific market simulation call. The first one will be held today at 1 p.m. Pacific, and if you need to have that information, then please reach out to marketsim@kaiso.com for any other market simulation information or to participate in that call today. All right. All right. Give me 1 moment. I'm just going to respond to a chat for just a moment. All right. Then let me go ahead. Oh, Kevin, please go ahead.
Hey, Tran, this is Kevin from PG&E. One quick question. For the week 1, I saw that the end date of that is March 20th. Is that a typo or just intended to be last long for 5 weeks?
Yeah, so I think that there are activities that start today that span through the March 20. So I don't believe that's a typo, but if Martin's on, or he can correct me, but I think that's appropriate, and he's been doing a great job of keeping the market simulation documentation updated on the release planning page, so you can also refer to that as well. And so, Kevin, I'll double check with him if, oh, actually, he just responded. So those are the dates for week 1, yes. So even though it starts 2/18, the validation will continue and the processes will continue through March 20.
Got it, perfect, thank you.
All right, thanks, Martin. Okay. So we'll go ahead and move on to FERC 881. All right, so for FERC 881, we did file the tariff on February 6th, so that is out there for your review. And that, of course, is pending the FERC acceptance. And notably in that tariff filing, we do have the extension for the implementation. And so our target is for the activation by Q1, Q2 of 2026, but we did ask for an extension through late 2026, December, just in case of unforeseen issues that caused additional delays. Okay. All right, so the BRS is being revised to align with that tariff language, and we're still working on publishing that, targeting mid-February. That may shift a little bit. The market simulation is in progress now for the WebLine R user interface in map stage. We know that there are some customers that are looking for additional support there, so we have some calls with customers to support that connectivity with the WebLine R UI to get access all sorted prior to getting further into the market simulation, prior to the APIs, and then the full market simulation. So please continue to reach out to us for any market simulation questions or issues that you have, and we'll work to support you. And then for production, the track 2 is planned for June of this year, and then we have the phased implementation currently targeted for January to July of 2026. Okay. All right, Felda, please go ahead. You may be on mute. All right, Felda, I don't hear you, but if you do have something, please go ahead and speak up, okay? All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So this has been updated just to reflect the latest milestones on the previous slide. And then just some of the things that I want to call out here is that the WebLine R training that as it pertains to FERP 881's implementation is planned for tomorrow. That's on the calendar now. And then also for the market simulation, you'll see that the full market simulation, including the B2B API for WebLine R, and then the scenarios that's planned now for April 2025. It may be late in late March, but by April, we plan to start that market simulation. And Felda, you feel free to put a message in the chat as well. I see that you're having audio issues, so we'll be happy to address that or talk after as well. All right, can you please go ahead?
Yeah, I just asked, Felda did put a question. Is the go live for the FERP AA1 track 2, it's July 12, 2025 or June 2025? Thank you.
So that's a great question. So we plan to implement that by June and ahead of the compliance target of July 12th of 2025. So July 12th is the compliance date, so that's our no later than, and we're shooting to have that functionality available by June.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, and then for track 3, you can see here we're proposing a delayed phase in implementation, and we did file the extension with FERC on February 6th, and we're waiting for a response there. All right, I don't see any other comments or, okay. Oh, sorry, I did see Felda's comment now. Thank you. So it seems like we addressed that. So I'll go ahead and move on. This no changes to this reference, and no changes here as well. So I'll go on to some reminders of how you can, the different implementation forums, as well as just the WebLine R interfaces and references. The only change here is that the WebLine R API, the last row here, instead of mid-March, that's planned to be available by April 2025. Okay. All right, so I'll go ahead and remind you of the WebLine R access matrix here. And again, we are working with customers who are still having issues connecting to the WebLine R UI in map stage, but this is a good reference that's from the BRS, and then we'll continue to work with customers who are still having issues connecting. All right, so let me move on to the FAB enhancements for WEIM. So we have the BRS 1.1 available for this scope item for dynamic ETSR limits safety net. And we are still working through the schedule here, so I don't have anything new to report, but we'll leave that on there as it is in the queue for 2025 at this time, and then I'll report out any updates that we have. All right. So on to fall 2025 release. So we have the subscriber participating transmission ownership model, which again, I added a note here. This effort is separate from the subscriber PTO market scheduling options policy initiative. So that is that other effort for a subscriber PTO market scheduling options is going on the board in May. And so you can review that on the stakeholder page and then follow along with that stakeholder initiative right now. And so that will get wrapped into the rug once we get through some of the earlier policy and stakeholder milestones, and then have more certainty on the implementation. Okay, but for subscriber PTO model, we have this queued up for the fall release, and the dates here are still being evaluated, but we do have the dates that are aligned with the normal fall release targets and implementation milestones. So as we build out the schedule, we will confirm those and then communicate out accordingly. So you can see here the upper settlements config guide, we would have planned for March to align with the normal fall release activation. And so we're still working through the schedule, like I mentioned, for all of these milestones. But I just wanted to call that one out because that's the next one that would be coming up. Okay. All right, and then for transmission exchange agreement, no changes here aside from the timeline, which is now again aligning with the fall release, which it would be a market simulation in July and then an activation by October. Okay. So I'll go on to our spring 2026 release. Oh, actually, Kevin, please go ahead.
Hey, Tran. I believe that on the last market simulation call on Thursday that we were having questions offline. This one, right? Like TEA, was it supposed to be like what's that called? The March activation date for WAPA, and then October, July for the other market participants?
Yeah, so there are different efforts that we have been coordinating with WAPA for their testing prior to the full activation of TEA, related to some of their contracts and other work that's happening. And so we've been supporting that testing in map stage with WAPA since last year. So I will sync up with Martin to make sure that for the next call we have some alignment on the distinction between what's being supported right now and the market sim activities related to that and production activation versus the full TEA market sim and activation, which is what I have here. So there might be components, like I mentioned, Kevin, that we're supporting WAPA for testing with, but it is not the full TEA project as you see in the BRS that's published. So the scope that I'm referring here is the full scope in the BRS.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I will move on now to spring 2026. The timeline is here for your reference. And we have training that's beginning in April for train the trainer sessions. And then for our ISO BA customers, we have training beginning in August. And so I know that I've received questions about the availability of the materials for the train the trainer sessions. And I'm looking into that with our team, and then we'll report out on any more specifics that I can for this. But no changes to the schedule that was provided since November. And then for settlements, we already covered this slide as far as what's available, and then the next milestone for settlements will be that config output file on April 29, and then the updates to the TechDoc posting and charge code matrix. That includes DAME, EDAM, and EDAM ISO BA participation rules. And then sorry, I'm going a little bit fast, but I do want to call out that one of the big things for DAME and EDAM is the question about parallel operations participation for ISO BA. So I wanted to just acknowledge that we know that there's a big question about who can participate and at what level in the parallel operations activities, and so we are still evaluating that, and definitely our focus is market simulation, making sure that we have a robust market simulation, but we understand that there is an interest and a need for the ISO BAA to participate in the parallel operations in some capacity, and so we're looking into that. I don't have any more information to provide, but I wanted to just touch on that because I know that there's there's a lot of planning that our customers need to do to be ready for that too, and so more to come on that topic. Okay. All right, and then for storage BCR, so I have a question from Felda. So I don't have any more information on storage BCR right now. It is on the release plan summary slide as an item, a future item that we're working on the schedule for. It is queued up for 2025. Okay. All right. And then Martin did add a clarification for TEA too. Thank you, Martin. All right. Okay. And then we are on track for the August 2025 kickoff for the DAME configurable parameters working group. No new updates there. So just more supporting material. And then for EDAM, the biggest thing here is the BRS 1.4, which is planned for publication this week. And then, of course, we will make sure that the scenarios that are being refreshed will have or be aligned with the latest version of the BRS. If not this first refresh that we're doing of the scenarios, the subsequent versions will incorporate any changes from the BRS up to the latest version as well. Okay. All right. Nothing else to report on EDAM. And then we have the WEAM BHE Montana that we're preparing for the market simulation for the end of this year, starting December. And for future releases, I'm not going to go through those. We don't have a lot of updates. I already touched on BCR, which is targeted for this year, but the timeline is still TBD. And that, I know I'm over, but that takes us to the end of our presentation today. Does anybody have any final questions or comments for me at this time? All right. Thank you all very much for joining. We look forward to talking to you again very soon before the next RUG and then at the next RUG on March 4th. All right. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Trang.